At 9:15 on the night of April 1st, 2006, Brian Shaffer walked into a bar in Columbus, Ohio. Security cameras watched him go in. No camera ever recorded him coming out. He has not been seen since. That single fact has driven investigators, amateur sleuths, and Brian's own family to the edge of reason for nearly 2 decades. Not because the bar was remote, not because the cameras were broken, not because the night was chaotic. The bar was crowded, the cameras were working, and the exit was watched. Brian Shaffer simply ceased to exist somewhere between the front door and the street. To understand how that is possible, or whether it is possible at all, you have to go back to the weeks before that night, back to the person Brian was, the pressures he was carrying, and the small chain of decisions that put him in that doorway. Brian Shaffer is 27 years old in the spring of 2006. He is a second-year medical student at Ohio State University, a few months away from finishing the academic year. He is tall, dark-haired, quiet in the way that people who think a lot tend to be quiet. His friends describe him as someone who laughs slowly, like the joke had to travel a distance before it landed. He grew up in Pickerington, Ohio, a small, unremarkable suburb about 15 miles east of Columbus along Route 256, in a neighborhood of two-story houses with aluminum gutters and backyard decks, and the particular quietness of a place where nothing dramatic is supposed to happen. His father, Richard, worked steadily, the kind of man who fixed things around the house on weekends and asked practical questions when his son talked about becoming a doctor. His mother, Renee, made the kind of home that people carry with them, not just in memory, but in reflex, in the way they set a table or stock a kitchen or leave a light on. Renee Shaffer died of cancer on March 28, 2006, 4 days before her son vanished. That detail matters more than almost anything else in this case, and investigators have never stopped turning it over. Brian had taken time away from Ohio State to be present during the final weeks of her illness. He had been in and out of hospital waiting rooms, in and out of a house that was slowly reorganizing itself around the fact of dying. He had watched his mother decline in the specific, unhurried cruelty that late-stage cancer inflicts, where there is enough time to understand what is happening, but not enough time to stop it. She was 53 years old. Brian was grieving in the acute, raw way that grief works in the first 72 hours, where ordinary objects in ordinary rooms feel like they belong to a different world, and the night hours stretch out past any reasonable length, and you pick up your phone to call someone and remember again that the person you want to call is the one who died. He had not gone back to class yet. He had not returned to the medical school campus, had not resumed the grinding rhythms of second-year coursework, pathophysiology, pharmacology, clinical rotations beginning to take shape on the horizon. He was still, in every practical sense, in free fall. His girlfriend, Alexis Waver, understood how much he was carrying. They had been together for years, the kind of relationship built on enough shared history that the silences between conversations mean something comfortable rather than something wrong. She was also a student at Ohio State. She knew Brian well enough to know when he was masking and when he was actually okay, and she had been watching him carefully since the funeral. On the evening of April 1st, a Saturday, the kind of early April night in Columbus, where the air still has a cold edge after dark, maybe 45 degrees, the sky the deep blue-black of a city, with enough light pollution to blur the stars. They made plans to go out with friends. Not to mark anything, not to process anything out loud, just to be in a room with people, with noise, with the low-grade reassurance that ordinary social life provides when sitting still has become unbearable. The destination was the short North District, a mile-long corridor of North High Street, between Victorian Village and the University neighborhood that had spent the early 2000s transforming itself from a fringe arts district into something more deliberately curated, galleries and coffee shops and restaurants with chalkboard menus and bars that were crowded on Saturday nights by a reliable mix of OSU students, young professionals, and the general social architecture of a mid-sized Midwestern city that takes its nightlife seriously. The specific anchor for the evening was the Ugly Tuna Saloona, a bar positioned on the second floor of a building at 1548 North High Street, above a restaurant on the ground level. The Ugly Tuna was a regular stop for the Ohio State crowd. Loud enough to make conversation an effort, packed enough on weekends that you had to navigate with your shoulders turned, the kind of bar where a round of drinks takes 15 minutes to reach you through the crowd, and you don't especially mind, because the point is not efficiency. Brian, Alexis, and their friend Clint Florence arrive sometime around 9 o'clock. They make their way up the stairs to the second floor, into the noise and the amber-lit press of a Saturday night crowd. The night starts normally. There is nothing in the surveillance footage from the first hour that suggests anything unusual. Brian is moving through the bar, stopping to talk, ordering drinks. He is wearing a dark jacket. He appears relaxed, or at least as relaxed as a man 4 days past his mother's funeral can appear in a bar with loud music and people who do not know anything is wrong. Then, at approximately 9:15 p.m., the footage captures something that becomes the pivot point of the entire case. Brian moves toward the entrance of the bar and encounters two women near the door, women he apparently knows or has met at some earlier point. The exchange is visible on camera, though the audio, as with most bar surveillance systems of that era, captures nothing useful. The conversation appears casual on the surface. Brian is talking, the women are talking back. Nobody's body language registers alarm or conflict. One of the women would later tell investigators that Brian seemed fine, that the conversation was light, that he was chatting the way you chat with someone you recognize in a crowded room. The exchange lasts only a few minutes, not long enough to be a serious conversation, long enough to be a real one. Then Brian turns toward the entrance of the Ugly Tuna. The camera records him walking toward the door. He does not come back through it. That is where the camera record ends. Not with a confrontation, not with a chase, not with any of the visible machinery that normally surrounds a disappearance. Just a young man in a bar full of people, turning toward a door, and then an absence where a person used to be. When Alexis can no longer find Brian in the crowd, she is not immediately alarmed. Bars are loud and disorienting. People step outside for air, drift to a different part of the room, lose track of each other in the geography of a packed second floor. She waits. She looks. She asks Clint. She checks her phone. No texts, no missed calls. By the time midnight passes and Brian has not responded to anything, the quiet concern sharpens into something with edges. By Sunday morning, it has become a call to the Columbus Police Department. Columbus Police intake a missing persons report. The standard protocol applies. Adults leave voluntarily. Adults sometimes need space. give it 24 hours. The grief factor is logged in the report. The assumption threading through the initial response, spoken in cautious, professional language, or simply left unspoken, is that Brian Shaffer walked out of that bar overwhelmed by something, needed to be alone with it, and would make contact when he was ready. He does not make contact. By Monday, the family is pressing hard. Richard Shaffer, a man who had just buried his wife and now could not reach his son, begins making calls in the methodical, barely controlled way that desperate people make calls when they have not yet been given permission to be desperate. He contacts Ohio State University. He contacts Columbus hospitals, one by one. Ohio Health Riverside Methodist, on Olentangy River Road, OSU Wexner Medical Center, Grant Medical Center, downtown. He contacts the friends whose numbers he has. He starts the particular kind of phone tree that families in this situation describe afterward. Calling a number, getting a no, calling the next number, getting another no, and not stopping, because stopping means admitting what stopping means. Columbus police pull the surveillance footage from the Ugly Tuna. What they find, or more precisely, what they do not find, transforms this case from a routine, open adult missing report into something that investigators will still be discussing 19 years later. The Ugly Tuna Saloona is on the second floor of 1548 North High Street. The primary entrance and exit for bar patrons is a single staircase leading from the second floor down to the street-level door that opens onto North High Street. That door is monitored by a camera positioned to capture everyone who passes through it. The footage from the night of April 1st is reviewed in full. It shows everyone who enters and exits through that door across the entire evening. Brian Shaffer is not on the exit footage. He is captured entering. He is captured in the bar. He is captured near the entrance for those final minutes around 9:15. And then he is simply not there anymore. Not on the exit footage, not on any interior camera after that final image, not on any exterior camera covering the street outside. In a bar with one primary exit, on a night when the cameras were functioning and capturing footage without interruption, a 27-year-old man entered and did not leave through the door he came in. The investigators review the footage multiple times. They go frame by frame through the staircase footage, through every angle of the street-level door. They expand the search to adjacent cameras, other security systems in the same building, cameras at the businesses neighboring 1548 North High, cameras positioned across the street capturing the opposite sidewalk. Nothing resolves. Brian does not appear on any external camera after he enters the Ugly Tuna that Saturday night. His cell phone, a Motorola model consistent with mid-2000s carrier plans, pings a tower in the vicinity of the bar at approximately 9 p.m., consistent with his presence in the short north. After that, the phone goes silent. No further pings, no outgoing calls, no text messages sent or received. The phone either powers down or is destroyed, and neither explanation leads anywhere reassuring. Then investigators learn something about the building itself that changes the texture of every theory that follows. The structure at 1548 North High Street is undergoing significant renovation at the time of Brian's disappearance. The work is ongoing. Active construction that has left sections of the building in an intermediate state, with incomplete walls, temporary partitions, and areas that are not fully sealed from the bar's occupied space. The construction crews are not working on Saturday nights, but the materials, the scaffolding, the partially finished passages, those are present. And crucially, some of those unfinished passages offer points of access between the bar's interior space and areas of the building that are not covered by the working security cameras. The theory develops within the first weeks of the investigation. Is it possible that Brian, intentionally or otherwise, accessed the construction zone and exited the building through a route not captured on any camera? Investigators spend considerable time mapping this. They walk the construction spaces. They measure the distances between the bar's main area and the access points in the unfinished sections. They try to determine whether a person who knew the bar's layout, a regular or someone who had been paying attention that evening, would have known where those gaps were and how to reach them. The answer, after that analysis, is carefully inconclusive. It is physically possible. The path is not comfortable, not well lit, not obvious to a casual bar patron, but it cannot be ruled out. What the construction theory does not explain is what happened on the other side. If Brian exited the building through an unmonitored passage somewhere in the renovation zone, he still had to emerge onto a street or an alley somewhere in the short north. Columbus in early April, on a Saturday night. This is not a neighborhood that empties out after dark. North High Street between 5th and 11th Avenue is one of the more consistently active corridors in the city on a weekend. There are people walking, cars moving, bars with their own outdoor cameras, restaurants with their windows lit. No individual reports a disoriented or distressed young man in the area. No camera captures anyone matching Brian's description, emerging from an unexpected access point in the vicinity of 1548 North High Street. He would have had to exit the building and then vanish again for a second time into a populated urban environment without leaving any trace. The search that begins in the first days after the report is filed expands steadily through April and into May. Columbus police and Brian's family coordinate organized efforts that cover the short north neighborhood and the surrounding areas, the grid of streets between High Street and the Olentangy River, the parks along the riverbank, the parking structures in the vicinity of the bar. Volunteers walk in lines through overgrown lots and along the river trail. Flyers go up across the short north, across the OSU campus, across the broader Columbus area. Brian's face, dark-haired, dark-eyed, the kind of face that looks slightly younger than 27 in photographs, appears in local newspapers and on local television. It eventually reaches national outlets, carried by the particular combination of factors that lift a missing persons case out of the regional news cycle. The surveillance footage with its unresolvable ending, the 4 days since his mother's funeral, the medical student identity that gives the story a clear narrative shape for editors looking for a hook. Alexis Weaver gives interviews in the weeks following Brian's disappearance. She is composed in the specific way that people are composed when composure is not a choice but a necessity. When falling apart would mean losing access to the practical work that still needs doing. She says she cannot explain what happened. She says she knows Brian was grieving, knows he was struggling, but she does not believe he simply walked away from everything and everyone without a word. She is asked in the careful language reporters use when they are asking what they are actually asking, whether she thinks Brian might have harmed himself. She says no, she does not elaborate. Her tone does not invite the follow-up question. The grief dimension of the case is something police never set entirely aside, and it is worth sitting with because it is not a cruel or unreasonable thing for investigators to consider. A man 4 days past his mother's death, drinking in a bar on a Saturday night in a city where he has been a student long enough to know its geography and its river. Acute grief in a young person combined with alcohol, combined with the particular 2 a.m. quality that creeps into a night even when it starts at 9, these are not nothing. They are factors that investigators are trained to weigh. The clinical framing of that scenario does include possibilities that no one in Brian's inner circle accepts, but investigators do not operate on the basis of acceptance or rejection. They operate on evidence. And here, as everywhere in this case, the evidence refuses to point cleanly in any direction. There's a theory, one that has circulated widely enough to shape the dominant conversation around this case in true crime communities for years, that Brian Shaffer engineered his own disappearance, that he identified the construction gaps in the building at 1548 North High, used them deliberately to exit without being captured on camera, and then left his relationship with Alexis, left Ohio State and the medical degree he was 2 years into, left Columbus, left the version of his life that was already fraying under the weight of grief, that the vanishing was not an accident or a tragedy, but a decision, rational or not, considered or impulsive, but a choice made by a person who was standing at an exit and decided to take it. The theory has a coherent internal logic. Brian was intelligent. You do not get 2 years into a medical degree at Ohio State without a functional working mind. He would have been capable of noticing the construction access points if he was looking for them. He was under a pressure that is genuinely hard to overstate. His mother had been dead for 4 days. He had not yet returned to school. And the grief that follows a loss like that can do profound things to a person's investment in the continuity of their own life. It can make the future feel like a foreign country, and the present feel like something borrowed. People have walked away before. Not many, but enough that criminologists have a category for it. Enough that there are documented cases of people who built entirely new lives under entirely new identities, sometimes for decades. The problem is the financial silence. After April 1st, 2006, Brian Shaffer's bank accounts show no activity. His credit cards record no transactions. His passport carries no record of international travel. Every system that a modern person moving through the world necessarily engages, financial institutions, government databases, medical records, the employment system, the social security number that appears on every job application and lease agreement, falls completely silent at precisely the moment Brian does, and stays silent for 19 years. This is not impossible to sustain for a person who planned carefully and had resources, but it requires a level of sustained intention that is difficult to maintain across nearly 2 decades. One lapse, one ATM withdrawal, one credit card use, one hospital visit under a real name, one encounter with a system that runs identity checks, and the trail reappears. It has not reappeared. Richard Shaffer does not believe his son walked away. He says this consistently across years of interviews, across the long deterioration that happens to families when a missing persons case stays open without resolution. The way hope becomes a different, harder thing over time, less like expectation and more like refusal. Richard's position is not only the position of a father, who cannot face an unwanted conclusion. It is the position of a man who argues, from specific knowledge of his son's character, that Brian would not have allowed the people who loved him to live in this kind of sustained not knowing. Whatever Brian was feeling, whatever he was carrying in those first days after Renee's death, disappearing into permanent wordless silence, does not fit the person Richard knew. Richard Shaffer died in 2008, 2 years after Brian vanished. He was still making calls, still meeting with investigators, still organizing efforts to find answers when his own health failed. He is buried in the Columbus area, in a grave that exists in the same city where his son walked into a bar and did not come out. The case outlived him by more than a decade and is still running. In 2007, with no body recovered and no confirmed sighting anywhere in the country, investigators and the family work with the television program Disappeared, which airs on Investigation Discovery. The episode brings the case to a national audience that had not been following Columbus news. A wave of tips comes in through the show's contact channels. Investigators receive and process each one. None produce a confirmed lead. Reported sightings surface over the subsequent months. A man matching Brian's general description, seen in a bar in a different city. Someone who looked like him working at a marina. A person at a gas station in a southwestern state whose face a witness connects to the photo from the news segment. Each sighting is followed up. Each one dissolves when examined closely. The Olentangy River is searched more than once. The river runs north to south through Columbus, passing through the University District, within reasonable distance of the short north. It is not a large or fast river. The Olentangy at Columbus is narrow and shallow in most stretches, the kind of river that college students cross on footbridges between campus buildings. But rivers hold things that land does not, and investigators return to it because they return to everything. The searches do not produce Brian Shaffer or any physical evidence connected to him. In 2015, a Columbus Police Department detective named David Rader, the investigator who had not formally closed the case and had continued working it beyond its status as an active priority on his own time and initiative, commissions a new review of the surveillance footage using video enhancement technology that had not been available in 2006. The enhancement work is painstaking. The original footage is relatively low resolution, captured by the mid-2000s commercial security camera systems that were standard for a bar of the Ugly Tuna's type and size, and the process of pulling additional detail from that kind of footage requires specialized software and frame-by-frame analysis that takes weeks rather than hours. The review does not produce a definitive answer, but it surfaces something that has since become one of the most contested visual details in the entire case. In a section of footage covering the area near the construction zone access point, after the last confirmed image of Brian at the bar entrance around 9:15, there is a figure, indistinct, present for only a few frames, not clearly identifiable. Some analysts who have reviewed the enhanced footage believe the figure could be Brian, moving through or near the construction area, heading toward an unmonitored exit point. Others look at the same frames and see only the visual noise that low-resolution footage produces when enhancement pushes it past its limits, the way pixels cluster into shapes that pattern-hungry human brains interpret as faces and figures. This ambiguity is not incidental. It is the structural condition of the entire case. Every piece of evidence in the disappearance of Brian Shaffer sits in exactly this kind of middle distance, close enough to be suggestive, far enough away to resist confirmation. The construction zone footage is either a man or it is not. The phone going dark is either deliberate or it is not. The financial silence is either a planned disappearance or it is the silence of someone who can no longer make transactions. None of it resolves. All of it points toward the door and stops there. What the 2015 review does establish with greater precision is the timeline of the last confirmed moment. Between 9:15 and 9:20 p.m. on April 1st, 2006, Brian Shaffer is visible on camera near the entrance of the Ugly Tuna Saloona, walking toward the door. That is the last verifiable record of Brian Shaffer that exists in any medium, in any database, in any camera system anywhere in the world. Everything after that point, the theories, the sightings, the construction zone hypothesis, the voluntary departure argument, the river searches, the enhanced footage analysis, is inference built on absence, which is a qualitatively different and much less stable thing than inference built on presence. Alexis Weaver eventually moved on with her life, as people must and do. She has spoken publicly about the case over the years in careful, measured language, consistent across interviews that span more than a decade. She says she does not know what happened. She describes the particular experience of being the partner of a missing person. Not a widow, which carries its own terrible clarity, and not the survivor of something with a defined shape and a name, but a person suspended in a state of permanent incompletion, where the story does not end and does not continue, but simply holds, unresolved, for as long as she is alive to hold it. There is no ceremony for that state, no anniversary that closes something, no marker in the ground that makes the grief official. Clint Florence, who was with Brian and Alexis at the Ugly Tuna that night, was interviewed by Columbus police multiple times in the days and weeks following the disappearance. His account is consistent across every interview. The night was normal. Brian seemed like someone managing his grief rather than drowning in it, and then at some point, Clint realized Brian was gone, and no one knew where he had gone. He has no information that answers the central question. The two women Brian spoke with near the bar entrance, the last people to have a documented interaction with him before the final camera image, gave statements that have been reviewed and re-reviewed across multiple stages of the investigation. Their account is consistent with the footage. A brief, casual conversation, nothing in Brian's manner that alarmed them, and then Brian turning toward the door and walking out of the frame of their awareness, as well as the frame of the camera. Neither woman has information about what happened after that moment. Across the true crime communities that have followed this case, the dedicated subreddits, the podcast discussions, the forum threads that have been active for over a decade, a number of alternative theories have developed with varying levels of detail and varying levels of coherence. One persistent line of inquiry focuses on whether Brian may have encountered individuals that night whose presence has never been established by the police investigation, whether there was someone in or near the bar whose interaction with Brian went unrecorded and unreported. This theory cannot be confirmed or refuted with the available evidence. It represents the kind of speculation that an unresolved case inevitably generates. The space left by missing facts fills with possible facts, and possible facts are very difficult to dismiss entirely. Another angle that researchers return to periodically concerns the precise geometry of the construction access, the renovation work at 1548 North High Street in early April 2006 was extensive enough that crew members interviewed by investigators afterward described multiple points where the unfinished spaces connected to the bar's occupied area in ways that were not fully controlled. The question of how easily a person could move from the bar into the construction zone and from the construction zone to the building's exterior has been debated with significant specificity in some corners of the internet. Floor plans reconstructed from public records, measurements taken from exterior photographs, accounts from people who were in the building around that period. The debate has not produced consensus. The most honest summary is that it was possible, that it was not straightforward, and that it remains unknown whether Brian knew the layout well enough to navigate it in the dark. What nobody has adequately explained, across every theory, every forum thread, every reinvestigation, is the phone. Brian's cell phone going permanently dark at 9 p.m. on April 1st, 2006, is the piece of the case that resists the most explanations. A person who voluntarily walked away from his life and intended to disappear might power down a phone as a deliberate first step. That is coherent. A person who walked out of a bar in distress without a specific plan, moving through a city on a Saturday night, that person almost certainly uses the phone at some point to call someone, to call for help, to call Alexis or his father or anyone. The silence is not absolute proof of anything, but across 19 years, through the entire arc of mobile phone technology, changing from the Motorola handsets of 2006 to the ubiquitous smartphone infrastructure of today, the silence has held without a single break. No call, no text, no data ping, no voicemail left at 3 a.m. by someone who needed to say something. Nothing. Brian Shaffer would be 46 years old today. If he completed his medical degree, if he is somewhere living under a name that is not his, practicing medicine or doing something else entirely, he would be at the stage of a career where the early years are behind you and the longer middle is fully underway. His father, Richard, who spent the last 2 years of his life trying to find him, is gone. His mother, Renee, who died 4 days before he vanished, was spared the specific torture of not knowing. There is something in the timing of those two deaths. The mother who died before the son disappeared, the father who died before the son was found. That the people who knew this family have noted across years without quite knowing what to do with the noting. The case sits in the category that investigators describe as the most difficult to carry. A missing person with no confirmed foul play, no confirmed cause of death, no confirmed voluntary departure. Every explanation requires ignoring a portion of the evidence. Every theory that closes one door opens two others. The surveillance footage from the Ugly Tuna is both the most valuable thing in the case file and its deepest frustration, comprehensive enough to show the entry, precise enough to confirm no exit through the primary door, and completely, maddeningly silent on what happened in the space between. Columbus Police Department has never officially closed the case. Brian Shaffer remains listed as a missing person in the national databases, his file still technically open, available for new evidence if new evidence ever surfaces. In practice, for a case this old with this evidence profile, open is a different word than active. It means the file exists. It means someone somewhere in the department is theoretically responsible for it. It means that if a tip comes in tomorrow that is specific and credible and verifiable, it will be processed. It does not mean anyone is making progress. There is a bar that no longer exists at 1548 North High Street in Columbus. The Ugly Tuna Saloona closed years ago, the building repurposed, the renovation that provided the only plausible alternate exit route long since completed and covered over. The physical space where Brian Shaffer spent his last documented hours has been altered enough that walking through it today tells you almost nothing about the night of April 1st, 2006. The cameras that captured him are gone. The construction gaps that may or may not have been his exit are sealed. What remains is the footage itself, archived, reviewed, enhanced, reviewed again, and the single image of a young man in a dark jacket walking toward a door at 9:15 on a Saturday night in a crowded bar in Columbus, Ohio. The room behind him is full of people. The camera is recording. The door is right there. He walks toward it, and then the footage moves forward, and he is not in it anymore. That is the last confirmed fact in the case of Brian Shaffer. 19 years later, it is still the last confirmed fact. Everything else, every theory, every search, every enhanced frame, every tip called in to a television program, every late-night forum thread trying to reconstruct the building's floor plan from a public records request, is built on the absence of what the camera should have shown next and did not. If this case stayed with you, the kind of disappearance that keeps pulling you back because no explanation fully closes it, there is another case on this channel where investigators spent just as long circling the same unanswerable questions. It is waiting for you next.